Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to show you how to start building your table using one approach that you can use. There's many ways of doing so, but I'll introduce some of the nodes that we discussed earlier in the lesson, and hopefully you'll be able to see how to combine them together in order to get this to work. So as usual, I'm going to drop a geo node, and I'm going to call this table. I'm going to jump inside. Now for this little exercise, just going to make it a little bit more visible for you. I'm going to use two tabletops. One is going to be a rectangular tabletop, and the second one is going to be a rounded tabletop. So for the rectangular, I'm going to drop a box. And for the rounded one, I'm going to drop a cube. Okay, so for the box, let's start with the size of it. So let's make it 3 units wide. For the height, let's make it 0.15. And for the depth, let's set it to 2. Okay, so here we have our table. For the cube, first of all, the important thing to do is change the primitive type to a polygon. Okay. Now I'm going to end caps, so that's going to put those caps on top. The height of it, I'm going to make it the same height as the rectangular table, so that's going to be 0.15 as well. And now you can play around by increasing the radius or whatnot. So if one thing that you can do to increase both elements or all elements in a parameter is to go to the actual name of the parameter, middle click, and then using the mouse button and moving it left and right to increase or decrease. So I'm going to set the radius to 1.5. So here we have our rectangular table, and beside it we have our circular table. Now, in order to allow me to switch between them, I'm going to drop, obviously, this switch node. So type switch. And now you can connect the two. So as we discussed earlier, whenever the switch node is enabled, the first input that you put in is going to be set to 0, the second one is going to be 1, and so on. So now simply by sliding this, I can switch between the two tabletops. Next step, we're going to rename our object. So box 1 is going to be rectangular, and the tube is going to be rounded, and switch, we're going to call it table switch. Now we need to move this whole setup a little bit above the grid line. So to do that, I'm going to drop a transform node, connect it to the output of the switch, and in the translation, let's say that we're going to move it 1.5 units up. So when you put a display on the transform, you'll see that the table has moved up. And again, it doesn't matter if you're using the rounded or the rectangular, it will show at that spot. So this one, let's call it move table up. In this next section, we're going to build the legs. The approach I'm going to take to do that is I'm going to create a guide that will allow me to see and specify where the legs are going to come out of the table. So I'll be able to modify that and make them wider and narrower, or I can even add additional legs if I want to. So for that, I'm going to use the grid. The grid is a really useful node because it allows you to create flat planes, as you can see here. but you can also use the points on this grid to actually populate it with additional objects. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the size of this grid to a 2x2 grid. And I'm also going to switch down the number of rows to 2 and the columns to 2. So we have a simple little square. Now, what I want to do with this grid is actually position it so it's sitting right at the bottom of my tabletop. So remember, we used the transform node to move it up to this point. So what I want to do is simply take this and move it up so it's sitting right at the bottom. And to do that, I'm going to use the bbox command. So in the center parameter, this is where you can move the grid right, up, or forward and back. So in this case, I want to access the center Y, which is the middle box in here. So what I'm going to do is call the bbox command, and the node that I want to call is actually this one, the move table up, because I need to get the reference of the Y position from it. So I'm going to type move table up, and you can see it already showing up. So I'm going to double click, put a quote to close that, and I'm going to look for the Y min. So if you remember, you have the Y max, which is the top edge, and the Y min is the bottom edge, and what I need is the Y min. So I'm going to type that all in capitals, so D underscore Y min. And the reason we type it like this is the syntax that's built in Houdini. So as soon as I do that and press enter, you'll see that our grid is actually jumped up and is fitting now exactly at the bottom of our tabletop. So even if I switch it to the rounded one, you'll see that it's still sitting here. So what I can do very simply is also adjust the size. Again, I can middle click on the size parameter and I can reduce it to whatever value I want. And by doing that, from the parameter, it will reduce all the elements that are connected to it. So I reduced it to 1.5. The next step is to actually extract these points, and maybe, if I want to inset them, or if I want to scale them, or it's not something that's necessary, but I'd like to show you the tool. I mean, we can leave it as it is right now, but I want to show you a little bit of what you can do with the poly extrude tool, which is a really cool tool that you will be using quite a bit. So here we have the poly extrude tool. Again, it works very similarly to the one in Maya that allows you to extract faces or primitives in Houdini, but there's a lot more features that you can find in here. So I'm going to connect my grid to the poly extrude tool. Now when I display it, you're not going to see a lot of stuff happening, but the one that I want is this, the inset. So if I start increasing it, you'll notice that it creates an inset for us. So technically I can, make it wider or narrower. Actually, if you make it wider, it's going to reverse on itself, so it's not a good idea. So let's say for our purposes, I'm going to make it a little bit narrower. Now, what I want is just to get these 4 points, the inner points. I don't want the outer points. There's something really neat with this. If you scroll down, you'll find something called output geometry and groups, and you'll see that it's checked for output front, output back, and output side, and preserve groups. Now the front is what you see in here, the back would be the underside, and the sides are all the points that are on the side. If I uncheck this, it got rid of them. Okay, so you can actually delete those points away. So again, this is not something that's absolutely required, but I just want to introduce you this poly extrude tool and what it can do. Now, what I want now are just the points. I don't need this actual surface anymore. So for that, there's another tool that's called the add tool. And when you connect it to the poly extrude, you see that you have a few options. So you have the points tab, you have the polygons tab, and you have the particles tab. What the add tool allows you to do is to actually create points one by one, and then you can connect them. So it's a really powerful tool to generate really complex setups and guides. But for now, the reason we want to use it is for this little checkbox that says delete geometry but keep the points. So if I click on it, you'll notice that the geometry, the face is gone, but the only thing that's left are the points that were in this poly extrude. So technically what I can do is simply go from the grid and connect that to add. It will do the same thing. I don't need this poly extrude, but again, I just want to have an excuse to show it to you. Let's move on to the leg. For that, I'll create a box, which I'll name table leg. And for the size, I'll set it to 0.15 on the X. I'm going to leave the Y as it is for now, and I'll show you Y in a second. And then for the width, or Z, I'm also going to set it to 0.15. So that's going to create this little rectangle that's kind of sticking up from the origin. Now, what I want to do is ensure that I'm always, the top of the leg will always match the bottom of the tabletop. So again, for this, I'm going to require to get the B box of the move table up. So we'll do that again. So B box and move table up, quotes, and then D underscore Y min. Okay, so the length of the table is actually the length of this table up, okay? But you'll notice that it's still kind of stuck here in the middle. And what we have to do for that is move it so the bottom is always sitting at the grid. And to enable that option, I'm going to type in the center Y. So I'm going to highlight the 0 and I'm going to type CH for channel. Open, close parentheses and quotes, and type size Y, close quotes, close parentheses, divided by 2. So effectively what this is doing is it's taking whatever height we have in here and it's dividing it by 2. So if our current height is 1.425, it's going to take this number and divide it by 2. Now you might be asking, since we set the height of the table to 1.5, how come it's only showing 1.425? The reason is that height was set at the center pivot. So if we look at the center pivot of the rectangular or rounded shapes, it is going to be at 1.5, but because we're looking for the D min, that's a little bit below. The dy max is going to be a little bit bigger than that number, so that's why we're getting these values. Okay, so that's going to be the first step for the table leg. The next thing that I want to do is to copy it onto my 4 points. So I'm going to move this over a little bit. And by the way, if all your nodes are not showing up, they will show up in this little mini map. You can press the O key to disable or enable that. Press tab, then copy 2 points, copy 2 points. So I'm going to connect my table leg onto the leftmost and the add one to the rightmost. And there you go. Now we have a bit of a problem because the legs are reverted, right? So they're facing upwards. So what I'll need to do is between the table leg and the copy to points, I'm going to drop another transform node, a regular transform node, put it between, and I'm going to rotate it on the X 180 degrees. So there's your table. What I need to do is connect the top part and the bottom part, and for that we're going to use a merge node. So merge, connect both the move table up and the copy to points, and there you go. You've got yourself a table. Now again, if you go to the switch, you can change that from a rounded or a rectangular table. And if you're not happy with the position of where the legs are, you can always go to the grid. And if you middle click on size, you can always shift that around to your heart's content. Okay, so this is it for a super basic table setup that allows you to create guides using the grid and switch between two different tabletops, and always ensure that the legs will always match where the tabletop is. So just to show you that, if I go to my move table up and I increase this number, the legs will always follow and be the proper size. Okay, thank you.